Hi, my name's Dave Price, and today I've got Phil Turtle from Landlord Licensing and Defence. Phil, how you doing, sir?
Very good, thank you. Enjoying this end of summer and the constant rain we've got here. I'm based down in Eastbourne and it's miserable today, but we're happy. But we're going to talk about scary. Scary because we're talking about fire.
Indeed, yes, fire's on the agenda for today then. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to be just interesting, scary, combination of the two. So,
Probably both. Let's just talk about fire and how often it happens and what it does, because that's the background to why it is probably one of the most enforced against issues in property. Councils and the fire authority, they are getting increasingly strong on enforcement. They've always been fairly strong, but of course, with Grenfell in everybody's minds, they're getting more and more aggressive in the enforcement of it. So I did a bit of checking on the government website this morning, ready for this discussion, and I looked at the latest fire statistics in all dwellings. That's your house, my house, everybody's flat, all the rental properties, all the HMOs.
yep,
And if we look back 20 odd years at 2009-10, in that year, there were 38,500 fires in dwellings.
38,500.
Yeah, this
I
is
don't know
this is
what I was expecting, but that sounds an awful lot.
it is a heck of a lot, isn't it? The good thing is, by 2023-24, that's down to 25,500. So we're 13,000 down, which is fantastic.
I was going to say,
But
yeah,
that's still 25,000 fires. And these are the fires that the Fire and Rescue Service are aware of and got called out to. Obviously, there are lots more fires that people manage to put out themselves with fire blankets or fire extinguishers or coats over the fire, tea towels over the fry pan, that sort of thing. So, and just for context, the number of fires in HMOs are generally considered to be the most risky sort of dwelling for
mm,
fire. In 2009-10, there were 1,121, and by 2023-24, that was down to 807, which is good, but that's still 807 too many.
yeah.
And what's really shocking, I guess, is the number of those fires that led to fatalities. So in 2009-10, in all dwellings there were 257 fatalities. Last year, 2023-24, that's down to 180, so a significant improvement,
Mm.
still quite a lot. In HMOs, strangely, there were 7 fatalities in 2009-10 and 6 in 2023-24. Now, a lot of that is down to the fact that for the last decade or so, councils have been very hot on fire precautions in HMOs, fire alarms, fire doors, and all that sort of stuff, and it does have an effect. That said, there were non-fatal injuries, 7,000 in 2009-10, nearly 5,000, so not that much of a reduction in 2023-24. And in HMOs, although there are only 7 deaths, 6 deaths in the respective periods, non-fatal injuries, 2009-10, 239, 2023-24, only down to 200. So there's still a lot of injuries. And
It also seems that the reductions are more on the single lets rather than HMOs are coming down a little bit, but not the same proportion as more standard property.
that's right. And that's because they are just by their nature a very high risk environment. You've got a lot of people and a lot of stuff crammed into a fairly small space. And my team and myself, we go out, we see hundreds and hundreds of HMOs, and the HMO bedrooms are always fairly small. People have got in there a whole stack of clothes, bedding, piles and piles of stuff, um, and maybe a little desk, and then they've got a computer, they've got their hair straighteners, hair dryer, uh, phones and phone chargers, all of those things that can cause ignition, cause a fire to start. And I actually wrote a little booklet which Landlords Defence promotes, absolutely free for landlords to give to tenants. And it's called 3 Minutes Till You Die. Now, that's a bit of a shocking title, I know. But it literally is. And the booklet explains, and it actually has a video embedded in it, through a QR code that tenants can watch. And it actually shows an HMO bedroom with all this stuff in close. And in that video, the occupant throws down, having used them, a set of hair tongs onto the bed and goes out. And from that point to the bedroom being what's called flashover, which is an 800 degrees C fireball, I think it was 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Whoa.
It's stunning.
3 minutes from a hair tong on the bed to a fire. Wow.
Yeah. So we might actually drop that video into this, I think, for people to watch. And if they can get it from going to bit.ly /t-fire, bit.ly/t-fire, and any landlord can download it, or even tenants can download it from there for free, because it really is educational as to what this is all about. Now, let's go back to enforcement.
Yes.
What happens to landlords? Well, there's a whole range of legislation that councils and the fire and rescue service can use. But let's think, we've just been talking about deaths and major injuries. And there's a hell of a lot of them. Well, you can end up as a landlord, because you're what's called the responsible person. You can end up in front of a judge on a gross negligence manslaughter charge if somebody dies, or gross negligence actual bodily harm if they are damaged. And if you can't point to some professional advice, like a professional fire risk assessment, that says you did all the right things, then you're guilty as hell, because it's actually down to the landlord always to ensure the fire safety of the tenants. And that includes things like, if they're wedging fire doors open, landlord, I'm afraid that's your responsibility.
So even if the tenants are doing silly things such as leaving fire doors propped open, still down classes.
It's down to the landlord, because in the state we have, tenants are fully protected, and none of us are trained about fire. When I was very young, there used to be little fire information films on the TV, but I haven't seen any of those for 30 odd years. So nobody's getting trained, and that's why we wrote the tenant fire book, because there's no other training, no other information available. But yeah, so the landlord can actually be prosecuted, taken to court. And we've seen recently quite a few landlords getting jail sentences. There was a case probably a month ago now, where the property, multi-story property, didn't have the correct fire protection on the staircase. It didn't have the right fire alarms, and it ended up with a fireman falling through the stairs because the stairs had been weakened by the fire. And he was badly injured, and the landlord got a jail sentence for that.
Wow.
Yeah, but in the sort of more everyday enforcement, both the fire service and the council, they can come along and they can use the Fire Safety Order 2005. They can use Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which is part of the Housing Act 2004, or they can use the HMO Management Regulations, Regulation 4, part of the Housing Act again, and they can either take you to court. Everything to do with housing is a criminal offence. They take you to court, you get a criminal record and a fine, which is potentially unlimited, because it's level 5 on the criminal scale, which goes unlimited, or they can issue with what's called a civil financial penalty of up to £30,000. And the going rate for Regulation 4 on HMOs is £28,000, where you haven't got the right fire doors, fire alarms, etc. in place.
So £28,000 is the average
fine.
Whoa.
Yeah. But let's put it in context. Landlords, if you're not doing your fire precautions correctly, you are putting lives on the line. It's as simple as that. You know, it's not about, well, where does it say I have to do it? Or, well, surely I don't need to put a fire door there. Or, well, that one's a bit battered, but it's okay. If you don't do this properly, somebody's potentially going to die. So every time you look at your rental property, every time you look at your HMO, stand in a room and think, what happens if there's a fire in this room? Where will it go? How will it be contained? How are people from the other rooms going to get out? How is this person going to get out and close the door to keep the fire in? So much to think about. And I'll be honest, as a landlord, I didn't realise until I was trained to be a fire risk assessor in order to be able to run a team here at Landlords Defence. I didn't realise how much I didn't know, because as with all of these things, you don't know what you don't know.
So you don't know, yeah.
Assessing fire risk is actually very complex, and so many different factors to take into account. And even I get landlords regularly saying, oh yeah, but the council's passed this. Councils, 90% of their officers are not actually trained in fire. They do a tiny amount of training as part of their HHSOS training. So they know the really worst stuff, but basically they have a tick list. But very often I'll go to a property, or my people will go to a property and come back and say, look, okay, this property, it had fire doors, it had fire escape windows. But the fire escape window at the back of the house, they went into a little yard with an 8-foot wall around it. So all that's going to happen is people are going to get out there and they're still going to die. But the council had signed that off because it had got fire escape windows, because they don't look further. You know, they don't look at the whole picture.
Just a tick box.
And that's the bit that's absolutely essential.
Right. Oh, well, let's talk about what landlords can do and the sort of precaution actually take. So smoke detectors was the first thing I was going to ask about on this.
Okay. Well, now then, here's a confusing area, of course. And landlords always say to me, where does it say I've got to do X? Show me where it says. And the legislation doesn't say. There's one piece of legislation called the Smoke and Carbon Monoxide Alarm (brackets England) Regulations 2015, which were amended in 2022, but it's still called the Smoke and Carbon Monoxide Alarm England Regulations 2015. And very unhelpfully, this legislation says you must have a minimum of one smoke alarm on each level of the property. Okay? Seems perfectly reasonable. And if you don't have that, then the council can use this particular piece of legislation to prosecute you. However, in most situations, one smoke alarm on each level of the property is woefully inadequate. Why that piece of legislation exists as it does, I really don't understand. What we do have is a load of what we call guidance, such as the building regulations and such as a document called LACORS, LACORS, which was published about 2006, 2008. A bit out of date, but still quite good on some things. But then fire alarms are properly covered by a British standard called, comes at the ready guys, BS 5839-6. BS 5839-6.
Yeah.
Now, that's very useful to know, but for most landlords, they're never going to spend the £300 it costs to buy it. So let me try and give you I know, it's bonkers, isn't it? That we are governed by things that most landlords will never, ever invest in, and probably if they did, they wouldn't understand it because it's written in technobabble. Anyway, let's start with what's needed in a buy-to-let, a small house, a small flat, let to a single family. And incidentally, who the property is let to does make a difference to what you need in terms of fire alarms. I'll try and cover that as we go through.
Right.
So, yeah, yes, okay. In a buy-to-let, you need what is called a grade D1 smoke alarm on the landing, in the hallway, in any living room. Okay, so it's not just one on every room, because the living room is considered to be a high risk room because you've got lots of electronic equipment in there, people using electrical stuff. And in the kitchen, we need a thing called a heat alarm, grade D1 heat alarm. All of these must be mains powered. There's no allowance for battery alarms anymore in rental property.
This is even just on buy-to-lets, they all have to be mains powered.
Yeah. Now, you might say, oh, yes, but all that lot is not retrospective. Well, safety does need to be retrospective. Okay, so things like the building regulations, yes, they are not retrospective. However, HHSRS, under which the council will prosecute you for this, that calls upon current building regulations as its guidance. It calls on BS 58396 as its guidance. So it's actually imperative that landlords keep their fire protection, alarms, fire doors, and everything up to date. Yeah. All right, there'll be a little bit of leeway, a couple of years to get it done. But if you haven't done it in a couple of years from when the requirements got upgraded, expect a fine, because you're playing fast and loose with people's lives. So yeah, expect a fine. Now, one thing I wanted to mention was, I said a heat alarm in the kitchen. Why heat? Well, it's because of false alarms. If you have a smoke detector in a kitchen, then every time you burn the toast, every time you burn something's frying, something's making smoke in the oven and you open the door, off it goes. And that's the whole house. Yeah. And it's been shown that false alarms, people very, very quickly, usually after as little as 3 false alarms, will start to ignore the fire alarm. There are loads of videos on the internet of people in public buildings when the fire alarm goes off. And you've probably seen it yourself. You just sit there and look at each other. You go, well, is this real? And, that's wasting valuable seconds, sometimes minutes. And if you think what I just said a few minutes ago about a fireball in an HMO or a bedroom or a living room, 3 minutes, time sat staring at each other is not good.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
In fact, there was sorry, go on.
So that's why it's the heat detectors in the kitchen, just to try and minimize the false alarms.
Yeah, exactly so. There was a case in Bolton a couple of years ago at a building called the Cube, which housed some 80 students, I think. And in the middle of the night, they had a massive fire, absolutely massive fire. The alarms went off, of course. Nobody moved. And it turned out that nobody moved because the fire alarms went off 3 times a day. False alarms every day, 3 times a day. Those kids only survived because a couple of students that were awake at the time smelt the smoke and they risked their own lives and they went around the building bashing on every door. Come on, get up, fire, get out.
Oh.
Nobody took any notice whatsoever of the fire alarms because of all the false alarms.
Yeah. Horrible story, but you can see how it happens if they're so used to them going off all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it turned out to be in the corridor, there was a smoke alarm directly outside the kitchen door, such that there was, whenever there was burning toast or whatever in the kitchen, somebody opened the door, out come a great big puff of real smoke. And of course, the smoke detector in the corridor goes, "Oh my God, that's a fire. Ring, 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 ring." You know, fire alarm design, getting the detectors in the right place is also absolutely critical. And, unfortunately, most of them are fitted by electricians who are not really trained actually how to do this properly. We should use fire alarm specialists.
That's a good point, actually, yes, because most people would just use a standard electrician to fit a fire alarm. They've got no backgrounds.
Very little. I mean, they do get the ones that are theoretically trained in fire alarms. They do get a little, but they're not properly fully trained in the design of alarm system.
Right. So for a single buy-to-let, then heat detector in the kitchen, and then smoke detectors, lounge, landing, and hallway.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we move on to HMOs?
Yeah, this is where it's going to get even more interesting, I think. Yes.
It certainly is. Okay. So if we've got a 1 or 2 story HMO, then it's similar. It's still the grade D1 smoke alarm. Now, by the way, grade D1 is a new nomenclature. I don't know if you remember, they're a bit like a pancake, these smoke alarms. And up until recently, they had a battery in the back of it for backup, and it was a replaceable battery. And it's great that they had a backup, because that meant that if the mains goes off, as it quite often can do in a fire, so let's say the fire starts under the stairs and takes out the consuming unit, then if there are mains only, nothing's going to happen. So they have a backup battery so that regardless, even if the mains fails, they'll start sounding. However, these batteries last about a year, and according to Murphy's Law or Sod's Law, they always fail in the middle of the night. And what happens when they fail is you get a warning that the battery's getting low, and it chirps incessantly every few seconds. Beep, beep, beep. And what happens? Tenants are asleep. This thing starts going off at 4 o'clock in the morning. The only thing a bleary-eyed tenant can actually do, once they've tried to go back to sleep and can't, they stand on a chair, they take the thing off the ceiling, take the battery out, and never ever put it back. So now you've got no smoke alarm. The grade D1, the new ones, they have an integrated battery that lasts the lifetime of the unit, so it never ever has to be replaced. Much better for maintenance, much cheaper, and it's never going to wake the tenant up in the middle of the night and get taken off the ceiling, or so we hope. Anyway, so back to where they need to go. So we need, as before, we need a smoke alarm on the landings, in the hallway, in the lounge or any other reception room, and a heat alarm in the kitchen, plus.
Right, so the standard buy-to-let, and then...
Plus is that we actually need smoke alarms in the bedrooms as well. And why? As I mentioned earlier on, these are places where there's a lot of stuff that's most inflammable and an awful lot of things that can cause a fire. And because of the cramped space, the things that can cause a fire are nearly always on top of something that can catch fire. Yeah.
Yes, so, that makes sense actually, that you say it. Yep.
Yeah. Phone chargers, phone wires, they tend to be on or near. You've got the socket at the side of the bed, or you've got a 4-way strip. We don't like those, but you've got 4-way strips under the bed with your phone charger and everything plugged in. The fire there, it's going to catch on the bedding or the curtains or your clothing. So HMO bedrooms are very high risk from a fire perspective. So we need a smoke alarm in there. And the other reason that we need one in there is if the bedroom has got a fire door, as it should have, then fire doors are pretty solid and they reduce the sound level. So if you've only got an alarm in the hallway or the landing, by the time it gets to where your head is at the bed head, it's probably not loud enough to wake you up.
Good point indeed, yes.
Now there's a technical thing that's required, and that is a sound level of 75 decibels dBA at the bed head. Now, most people are never going to measure that, but the rule of thumb is if you haven't got a sounder inside the bedroom, it's probably not going to wake the tenant up.
Right.
So, for the sake of having an alarm in there, it's just got to be done.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's your 1 and 2 story HMO. Once we get on to 3 stories or above, then the regulations do say we've got to have a panel system, the panel down in the hallway by the front door. And that's what's called a grade A system. And this has a centralized controller. The property is split up into fire zones with little indicator lights on the panel. And in addition to the smoke and heat detectors, it also has what's called manual control points, or the break glass, red break glass things that you smash to set the alarm off. So it has all of those. And the really important bit about that is that these zone indications on the alarm panel, so that immediately tells the fire brigade when they arrive where the fire is. And in a bigger HMO, some can be, I mean, we've worked on HMOs up to 200 rooms. There you really need to know. But even in a 3 or 4 story HMOs with 8, 9, 10 bedrooms, if the fire brigade's coming in, they need to know quickly where to go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too.
Okay, so, and again, strangely, through a quirk of history, grade D systems, we talk about alarms because everything's in one little pancake unit. On grade A systems, we have detectors and we have sounders, which are quite often separate, the big red things in the hallway. But even when you want them in the rooms, we have what's called a sounder base, so that you have the ceiling, then the sounder, and then the smoke alarm that plugs into it.
Right.
Like a pile of pancakes. And you need a sounder base in every living room, bedroom, kitchen, and the hallways. Yeah.
Right.
So that's it. So grade A for three stories or more, and grade D for 1 and 2 stories.
Right. And, well, because there's some HMOs where people actually have individual cooking facilities in their bedrooms. Does that change the requirements?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It absolutely does. And this goes back to the need to control false alarms. So in any bed sitting room, as we'll call it, that has any sort of cooking facilities, be that a microwave or a toaster or a fridge, then we need what's called a mixed system. So whether the main interlinked system is a grade A or a grade D doesn't matter. But what we do on the interlinked or the building system, in each bedroom, instead of a smoke detector, we fit a heat detector. And that's because heat detectors are not set off by burning toast.
Yeah.
Or burning frying or whatever. So little bits of smoke would set off a smoke alarm. They're not going to set off a heat alarm. So we're not going to have everybody out of the HMO just because somebody in room 1 burnt some toast. So that's good. So now we've got the false alarms under control. There is, of course, a downside. now the person in that room, if they're sleeping, the heat alarm isn't going to go off until it's too late. Because by the time there's enough heat to set off that alarm, then unfortunately our occupant is probably toast, or they're being suffocated by poisonous gases.
Yeah.
So what we do to solve that problem is we fit also a grade D1 smoke alarm that's still powered by the mains, but it isn't interconnected to anything else. So its job is to wake up that person so they can get out of their room before the fire develops into something bad. And that's its only job. Right. Once they're awake, then we hope they wake up and get the hell out, close the door, and then the heat alarm will go off if it develops into a full fire and get everybody else out of the building.
Right, and then you haven't got the false alarm problems with people cooking.
No, I mean that smoke alarm will still go off if they burn toast. Yeah, but all they have to do then is press the button on the alarm on the ceiling to shut it up, let the smoke out of the window or whatever, and then everything resets.
Yeah,
but it doesn't get everybody woken up in the middle of the night to leave the building, whatever, and getting into that bolt and cube situation where it goes off so often that nobody believes it. So in a mixed system, we always tell people, if it goes off, there's something really hot happening in one of the bedrooms, you need to get out quick. Yeah.
Oh, right. I think that's fire and smoke alarms covered then, is it?
Yeah, the final thing to say on that is it is complex, particularly if you've got an HMO. For goodness sake, get a fire risk assessment done by a professional. In most HMOs, you're actually legally obliged under the fire safety order to have an annual fire risk assessment, and you could be prosecuted for not having one. In some shared house HMOs, you're not legally required, but for goodness sake, if you don't know, if you're not qualified, get one. Have at least one done. Doesn't necessarily need to be done every year. If nothing's changed, then the landlord can actually do his own the second year, the third year, and then maybe get us back the third year or fourth year. But unless you really know what you're doing, get a fire risk assessor in at least once, because 90-odd% of the properties we go to, HMOs, flats, two-story dwellings, single lets, nearly always the fire precautions are wrong in some way, in a way that could cause death or severe injury to a person, and of course, which could get the landlord prosecuted or fined.
Right. And it really is that high, 90%?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. God, that's getting quite scary, yes.
I mean, we're talking about fire precautions generally here, not just the alarms in terms of that, but very often the alarms are not up to scratch.
Right. Because, as you said, we covered the alarms, because I also wanted to ask about fire doors as well. Right.
Now, there's an interesting topic. It's a very complicated one. So let me try and do simple insofar as it's possible. Again, the caveat is going to be, this is an area where you need to get a fire risk assessor in at least once to your property to know that you've got the basics of the design right, the right fire doors in the right place, the right fire escape windows, if that's part of the strategy. Legislation doesn't tell you what's needed. Again, landlords also say, well, where does it say I have to do that? It doesn't. The Housing Act, under which you will be prosecuted, is there to tell councils what they can prosecute you for. But it doesn't tell you, it's not about you, the landlord, it's about them enforcing against you. Yeah. But it doesn't tell you what you have to do in order not to get prosecuted. There are things called guidance. There's one called lay cause, which I mentioned already. and there's the building regulations in approved document B. That's in 2 volumes. One is for dwellings, one is for not dwellings. So you obviously need the dwellings one. If you've got an HMO, then your council's HMO amenity standards may tell you what you need in terms of fire precautions, but they're very variable in how in-depth they are.
Is this me? I'm just really surprised there isn't very clear cut. This is exactly what you need to do.
No, there isn't.
Wow.
And unfortunately, a lot of it is, yeah, there's a certain amount in the guidance, but unless you've got somebody with the skills to come and look at your property and say, well, yeah, that guidance says that's what normally happens, but because you've got this, this, and this, so for example, because you've got to go through the kitchen lounge from upstairs to get out, well, you've got to do it completely differently, because now you're trying to get people to go through a high-risk room to get out of the building, and actually through the room where most fires are likely to start. Can't do that. Yeah. And then you've got to get into, can we redesign the escape route so they don't have to go through it? And if not, we might have to end up fitting a sprinkler system or a water mist system to get people out safely. Or we've got to change the upstairs windows so that they are proper fire escape windows.
Is this why there's no clear legislation on it? Because it is very much down to each individual property, the layout.
Absolutely. It's you can't do it on a pure tick box. Approved document B in the building regs does its best because it tells you how to build something, and it's a very good point of reference. But it doesn't tell you how to deal with a situation where the building wasn't built like that. Yeah. And, you know, if we go back, the thing was to go open plan, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And whilst that's permissible but not safe in your own residence, it's not permissible in a rental property where you, the landlord, are therefore putting the tenants' lives at risk. It's sort of, the law says it's one thing to put yourself and your family at risk. It's a completely different matter to put your tenants' lives at risk.
Yeah? Absolutely, yeah. Hence, gas safety certificates only for rented property, not for your own house.
Yeah, although if you have any common sense, you probably have one done on your own house.
Yeah,
you get it done. You get your boiler serviced each year, and you get the fire certificate done, or at least the checks done. So, right. So to fire doors, let's start with HMOs.
Yeah.
Because HMOs are quite simple. They're a high-risk place generally. You've got to have what's called a protected escape route. And that means that it's usually the landing, the stairs, the hallway, and then the front door. That's your most common escape route. And what we've got to do is make sure that any fire that starts does not get into that protected escape route. And the way we achieve that is by compartmentation, and that's making sure that every room will contain a fire for up to 30 minutes.
Right.
And the walls and the ceilings are usually up to that job. The door is not, unless it's a fire door. And we have very specific fire doors for this job, and they're called FD fire door, FD 30-minute fire door, S with added smoke control.
Right.
Yeah, so you may have seen on the edge of fire doors or in the frame, there's a plastic strip which contains intumescent material, and that is stuff usually based on graphite, but when it gets hot, it expands, and it expands massively, and it fills the gap.
Right.
So we have a fire door which is either made of solid wood in the old days, or these days you get pretty ones with nice panel patterns on them. Look much nicer than the horrible blank pieces of wood that fire doors used to be. and they've got a complicated inner structure. And unfortunately, you can't just tap on those and know that they are fire doors because they sound hollow very often.
Oh, right.
That's why it's essential that they come, or they should do, if you buy the right ones, they come with a certification label on the top surface. And it's essential that stays in place, because that's the only way that we as fire risk assessors or council or fire authority, the only way they can be certain that it's actually a fire door.
And it's literally just on the top
edge, right at the top, yeah.
Right, so where you'd never normally see it.
You should, you don't normally see it, and the top edge must never ever be planed or cut, must never be painted, because you're going to lose the label. And they're not actually made to be trimmed at the top; they're only made to be trimmed at the bottom, and a tiny amount at the sides. But that's a level of detail that, unfortunately, very few landlords know that, and very few joiners seem to know that. So we see an awful lot of butchered fire doors that are just no longer fire doors. They're not going to last 30 minutes anymore. Then going back to the FD30S, the S, you very often see these little brush strips that go around the edge on the top and the two sides. And the job of that is to stop the smoke coming through into the hallway. So the early part of a fire creates an awful lot of smoke. It's mostly poisonous. It's full of carbon monoxide and other horrible things like cyanide gas. It's black, it's toxic. Most people die of smoke inhalation, not actual fire. They're dead long before the fire burns them. And the purpose of those is to try and keep that smoke out of the escape route for as long as possible.
Right.
Eventually, maybe after 10 or 15 minutes, the intumescent will expand, but that doesn't expand until it's getting very hot. So that's why we call these cold smoke seals, because it's in the cooler phase of the fire. But the job of these brushes, or there might be little rubber vanes, is to keep the smoke back in the room where the fire is, hoping that the occupant of that room has got out and closed the door behind them. Or in an HMO, we've got these pretty horrible hydraulic closers on the top of every door. They're absolutely essential. They're a pain in the backside for everybody that lives there. They're a pain to the landlord in terms of maintenance of keeping them so they close the door properly but without banging. But they are absolutely essential. Without those, it's not actually a fire door, because a fire door that's open, even slightly, isn't a fire door, it's a hole through which smoke and flame will pass. And if you're upstairs and it's one of the downstairs rooms that's got the fire, and the fire is coming through this hole where the door isn't shut, how on earth are you going to get out?
Yeah, very good point.
So that's HMOs. So it's every door off the protected escape route, with the exception of the bathroom, unless there's a boiler in there. But a bathroom with no ignition source, you don't need a fire door. And things like an airing cupboard where there's no electrics, you don't need a fire door. But if there's electrics in there, then you do. If there's a boiler in the bathroom, then you do. So it's basically every door. Yeah.
Right. So every door that opens onto the escape route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they all need to have 3 fire-rated hinges. Why fire-rated? Because they've got to withstand 800 degrees Celsius. Yeah, for half an hour at least. It's got to have, as we said, intumescent strips in the cold smoke seals, a fire-rated latch. The actual latch has got to be able to withstand 800 degrees C, otherwise the door's going to spring open. And it's got to be latched because the fire is going to make the door try to twist.
Yeah.
So we've got to hold it shut in its frame. So that's a combination of the closer and the latch holding it shut. You've got to have a thumb turn exit, because if you're in a room that's half full of toxic smoke at 200 degrees centigrade that's going to fry your lungs, you don't want to be trying to look for a key. Yeah, and that's every door you might have to go through on the way out. So bedroom doors, if there's a lock on the if there's a lock on the lounge door for any reason, or the kitchen, must have thumb turns, as must the front door, the final exit door. You've got to be able to get out of that with no key. I remember doing an inspection on a house in Salford. The lady was home, she let me in, and she potted off upstairs. When I came to the front door, I needed to pop out to look at something. I was doing a full compliance inspection. Well, she'd taken the key upstairs with her. And that's when it really hits you. If there was a fire chasing me at this time, how the hell am I going to get out? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's one, everybody that's listening to this, not just in your rental properties, but look at your own house, look at your own flat. If there's a fire, can you get out of every bedroom and out of the front door by just turning a thumb turn?
Yeah.
And if not, change it.
Yeah.
Keys left in the lock. Yep, that's all very well, but there'll be the one time will be the time there's an active fire where somebody forgot to leave the key in the door. Just change the lock, make it a thumb turn to escape. Okay, now anybody that's looked at LACORs will see that it says that in small shared house HMOs, you don't necessarily have to have fire doors. You can have what's it describes as a conventional well-fitting door of solid construction. That's fine.
Right.
And indeed, such a door will hold back a fire for probably 20 minutes or so. However, 90% of doors in properties these days are not well-fitting doors of solid construction because they've all gone now. We threw them away and we put in these pretty panelled doors that are made of cardboard.
Yeah.
They're very light, they sound very hollow, and actually all they are is two skins held apart by an egg crate arrangement of literally cardboard. And then 4 little wooden strips around the edge. They ain't going to hold back a fire for more than 5 minutes. So they've got to go. A lot of properties, Victorian properties, have what we call panelled doors, where you've got 4 or 6 panels, and in the panel is basically a piece of plywood. And you can sort of tell the way it taps. It's quite solid. It rings loud a bit. Well, they might stop a fire for 12 minutes or 8 minutes, but again, they're not really up to the job. So they've got to go as well, really. If we're going to try and look after the lives of our tenants, then we need to be putting fire doors. Now, even in that situation, you know, if you wanted to go and buy a well-fitting solid door, there's only one door that you can really buy these days that's economical, and that's actually an FD30 fire door. It's the cheapest way to fulfill that, yeah. Now, in shared houses, then they don't have to have the smoke seals, and they don't have to have the hydraulic closers. The same is true in
don't have to have the smoke seals.
No, because, well, in a lot of buy-to-lets, we still have a situation where there's no smoke alarms in the bedroom.
Right.
And the old theory was, and you'll see why this theory really sort of falls apart and why we need alarms in the bedrooms. But the old way was you could have an alarm, smoke alarm on the hallway or on the landing, and you didn't have the smoke control strips, smoke control brushes around the door, so that the smoke could leak out through the edge of the door and get to the smoke alarm in the hallway. Okay, I can see that, we can see the logic of that.
Yeah.
But just think about it. In that scenario, for the smoke to be getting through the gap around the door, and I'm looking at that door behind your head, how low down it is from the ceiling. Yep. How much smoke does there have to be in your bedroom before it gets through that door and sets off the smoke alarm. I don't think I would want to wait that long before being woken up, would you?
No, very good point.
So that's why landlords, we need fire doors and we need smoke alarms in bedrooms.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can see that the guidance, which was Landlords, was written in 2006, 2008, is outdated. Unfortunately, they never rewrote it. They never brought it up to date. There are rumours that it might be brought up to date in the next couple of years, but until then, it's really down to getting professional advice from somebody that's actually studied all this stuff, knows how to advise you how to keep your tenants safe. But if you put fire doors on all the bedrooms, if you put smoke alarms in all the bedrooms, you're doing a pretty good job.
But as you say, the key thing is actually to get a proper fire assessment because of the individual layout of the property. Yeah, again, what a lot of people don't realise, and this comes down to council people as well, we used to have, let's think, an awful lot of the housing stock, rental stock is Victorian, Victorian terraced. And it used to have sliding sash windows, single glazed, bit rattly, prone to drafts. But when you opened them, there was a big old hole that you could jump through. Then in the 70s, we started replacing all those with double glazing. Yeah. And we put in double glazed windows that had nice opening fan lights, maybe an opening sash to one side, but very often not, just a big square area of glass and a fan light. No fire escape. Yep.
Because to be a fire escape window, it's got to be a certain size. I think it's 0.33 or 0.36 square meters. I can't remember exactly. And one direction's got to be at least 450 millimeters. And that's the size of the opening when the window's open. So normal double glazing hinges, they don't actually open it that far. So you end up with only 2/3 of the space available. You can get fire escape window hinges that open them fully, but even then, very often the openings are not up to it. So we've lost that route of escape. Excuse me. So we've lost that route of escape, and that actually means now we need, even in a 2 up, 2 down, we need a protected escape route. So we must, in that situation, have fire doors on the escape route, and we must have smoke alarms in the bedrooms and the upstairs rooms. And again, unless you know what you're looking at, you wouldn't realise that. And even if you do have fire escape windows, they've got to go to a place of safety, as we call it. Yeah, somewhere where the person can either escape fully and go and get on the nearest bus. That's a place of safety. They've got well away. Or it's sufficiently far away that they might be in a place they need to be rescued from, or then this might be at the end of a long garden where it's paneling fence, and in extremis you can just kick it down and escape through somebody else's house. That's acceptable in certain situations, but place of safety, it's got to be at least as far away as the height of the building, and that's because the building, the end gable wall can fall. Fire will take the same sort of burning material, will take the same sort of trajectory. So you've got to be further away than that. So again, all these things have got to be taken into account. So if you've got a rental property and your bedroom doors or your lounge doors, kitchen door are made of egg crate material, not good enough. It's not going to save anybody's life. And that's what it all comes down to. Can we save people's life? All right, the statistics tell us that the numbers of fatal fires are coming down, and that's great. But one fatal fire in your property, you're in front of a judge on a gross negligence manslaughter charge. And your only defense is, I've got a fire risk assessment and I did everything it told me to. Right? Now it's me as the fire risk assessor that's in front of the judge, not you.
And on the fire risk assessment, because some people think, do the fire brigade offer that service at all, or?
No, not anymore. It's all private risk assessors.
Right. So it'd really be coming to someone like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you guys, presumably if you're at a property though, you won't just address the fire safety. I know we've just been talking about fire today, but you'll look all aspects of the property.
Well, this is the difference between the service we provide and your common or garden fire risk assessor. The common or garden fire risk assessor, they're highly trained, but only in fire. They don't deal with HHSRS, they don't deal with amenity standards, and they don't deal with the detail of all the law and regulations and all the other dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation. There are very few companies that offer this as or have people qualified to offer this as an all-in-the-round service. So what we do is a full compliance audit of every property that we go to. We don't actually, we won't go and just do a fire risk assessment.
That's just part of the overall.
It's got to be for us to send one of our people out, and for it to be properly useful to the landlord. We need to look at all the aspects. In HHSRS, there are 29 different hazards. Yeah, things like trip hazards, falling out of window hazards, stuff to do with lead, to do with radiation, to do with noxious chemicals. Things like paint under the stairs. Well, that could be part of the fire problem. That could be a very high fire load, as we call it.
Yeah.
Cold and damp, excess heat. That's becoming quite a problem actually. With our increasing the amount of sunshine we have in this country, which is wonderful, we're now getting bedrooms and living rooms, particularly bedrooms, but in the height of summer, the temperature is going up so high, they're unbearable. And more we're having to say to landlords, you need to put solar control film on these rooms.
Right.
Yeah, that's going to be a big problem over the next few years.
Yeah, I wouldn't even cross my mind at all, but we're straying off the tracks. We were just going to talk about fire today.
Yes. Okay.
And I think we've more than enough covered it. And I think it really just underpins what a crucial thing it is to get that assessment done properly.
I think so. Just let me do one last word to landlords listening, and that is just quickly, what do landlords get fined the most for? And in relation to fire doors, that's missing fire doors, i.e. doors that should have, or doorways that should have a fire door in them but don't. That's a big one. But badly fitting or damaged fire doors. A damaged fire door isn't going to stand up for 30 minutes. And whilst you can make arguments about how well they're fitted, and unfortunately, a lot of fire doors are fitted into the original door frames, which were never actually fire door capable. A fire door is generally 44 millimeters thick. Most of those door frames were made for 35 millimeter standard doors, so the door sticks out. That's going to fail in a fire. And then the gaps around the door. Now, the regulations, and the government's recently published this on their website, say that the gaps to the top and the two sides need to be between 2 to 4 millimeters. That's a very, very, very tight specification. And since Grenfell, councils, who, as we've said, they're pretty much tick box in a lot of things, they will now prosecute landlords if the gaps around their fire doors at any point are more than 4 millimeters. They go around with their little plastic wedges, they stick them in the door frame, and they take a photo of it being more than 4 millimeters, and then you've had it. Yeah, I don't agree with it because in a lot of situations, then some variance can be accommodated with other measures, but yeah, at the end of the day, they're the ones with the big stick. They can take you to court. They can issue fines. So, guys, if the gaps around your fire door are more than 4 millimeters, you need to fix it. Yeah, and that may mean a new fire door. It may mean a new frame. Ideally, they should be a matched pair anyway. And the other bit on that, if it's an FD30S, a smoke seal door, then the bottom gap should be 3 millimeters. Now, that's very difficult to achieve. And very often, you actually have to make a gap that's up to 6 millimeters and then fit what's called a drop down smoke seal.
Right.
Yeah, basically, get a fire risk assessor in, get them to go around, tell you everything that he's doing. You won't like the answers. It's going to cost you money. But, yeah, what do you want? Spend a couple of grand now or get a 28 grand fine?
And potentially saving people's lives as well.
And not ending up in front of the court on a gross negligence manslaughter. Yeah.
No, a very sobering chat this morning on that one, Phil, but hugely important though. And as you say, to me, it just screams, get a proper fire assessment done, get a proper assessment done of the property, because there's so many nuances actually there for people just to take the risk themselves. It doesn't seem worthwhile at all.
Hopefully that will hit home with some landlords and they will upgrade things so that their tenants are properly safe.
Yep. Fingers crossed, that's what we all want. So brilliant, Phil. Thank you so much for your time. Always educational talking to you. And yeah, even on such a sobering subject, just the amount of pitfalls that are out there for landlords. So
it's been a pleasure, Dave.
No, thanks again, and no doubt we shall see you soon.